Hello, my name is Lauren Hines, and I conducted a study that I titled Impact of Mortality Awareness on Self-Esteem and Anxiety. Before I begin discussing my own research, I think I should give some background information on terror management theory. This theory proposes that when individuals are aware of their death, they experience some anxiety, and that awareness of the inevitability of their death is called mortality salience. To defend against that anxiety, they utilize cultural worldviews or self-esteem. And cultural worldviews are kind of like religion. They give some stability, order, and meaning to one's life. And then self-esteem is the belief that one is a valued participant in a meaningful reality. Or in other words, the individual believes that they live up to the standards of that cultural worldview. A little more about the death anxiety. There is the anxiety buffer hypothesis that states when an individual is aware of their death, they experience the increase in anxiety that activates self-esteem, and self-esteem lessens the anxiety. There have been some studies conducted on terror management theory, and the first one I want to discuss was by Greenberg et al. In this study, they manipulated self-esteem in the participants by either giving positive or neutral feedback on the participant's personality. And after that, they were exposed to videos about autopsies and electrocution, and the researchers measured their anxiety levels after that video. And the researchers found that participants in the neutral self-esteem condition had higher anxiety than those in the elevated self-esteem condition. And that further supports the anxiety buffer hypothesis and the negative correlation between self-esteem and anxiety. And another study was conducted by Pazynski, where participants were interviewed either in front of a funeral home or away from it to have the induction of mortality salience through the environment. With that being said, there is an obvious gap in the research that my study tries to fill. For example, the previous studies manipulated self-esteem to see resulting anxiety levels when individuals think about death. But my study did not do that. I did not manipulate self-esteem, but I wanted to see how self-esteem changed when individuals were in an environment that caused thoughts of death. Therefore, I constructed my experimental hypothesis that states an environment inducing a mortality salient condition will increase an individual's self-esteem and lower anxiety levels. With that hypothesis, I created a simple research design called an independent group's pretest post-test design. That means participants experience only one condition in the study and they complete a pretest and a post-test. The study had one manipulated variable, which was that awareness of death that was created through decorating a psychology laboratory. And I had three conditions of decoration: funeral home decoration, happy decoration, and no decoration. And the dependent variables that I was measuring were self-esteem and anxiety levels. A little bit more about the decoration of the psychology laboratory. On the left side of the screen is the funeral home condition, and decorating the laboratory, I put this photo on the board so they could think about death, and I turned the lights off and scattered fake candles around the room. And on the right side of the screen, you see the happy condition. This photo was displayed on the board to maybe cause the participants to think about family, love, or something happy, and all of the lights were turned on in the laboratory. Now, to get into the specific methods of my study, I first gathered participants through convenient sampling at the University of Charleston. When participants arrived for the study, I gave them a folder with a designated number and the study materials, which included 2 informed consent forms, a pretest questionnaire, a word search, and a post-test questionnaire, and then finally the debriefing statement. They first signed the 2 consent forms, and completed the pretest. But while they were doing the pretest, I told them that we were going to have to move rooms because a meeting was happening in that room. I took them to the psych lab that I had previously decorated, and once they got in there, I chatted with them a little bit so they could take in the environment, and then I had them complete the word search and the post-test. And finally, I debriefed them on the true nature of the study. The pretest questionnaire contained 20 questions that tested the participants on anxiety, self-esteem, and depression using a 1 to 7 Likert scale. And some of the questions included, I feel anxious or on edge, and I am satisfied with myself. I also included some filler questions so they were unsure of what I was studying. This is the word search that they had to complete. I gave them 3 minutes to find the 100 words, and it served as a distraction task because I wanted those death thoughts to retreat to the subconscious, and I wanted them to solely focus on this word search during that time period. The post-test questionnaire contained the same 20 questions as the pre-test, but you can see that it did include some demographic questions and a manipulation check to make sure that those participants had thoughts of death when they completed the post-test questionnaire. I ended up getting 33 participants for my study, and they were all students at the University of Charleston. There were 12 participants in the funeral home or mortality salient condition, 11 participants in the happy condition, and 10 participants in the control condition. I used 3 statistical tests to analyze my data: MANOVA, one-way ANOVA, and paired samples t-test. With the MANOVA test, I did not find significance, meaning that the groups performed the same on the pretest and had the same baseline levels of anxiety, depression, and self-esteem. With the ANOVA, I conducted 15 analyses on the questions that tested anxiety, self-esteem, and depression, and there was no significance, meaning that the conditions did not behave differently from each other on the post-test. And finally, with the paired samples t-test, I did find significance with one question, which was, I feel afraid as if something awful might happen. The happy condition with that question scored higher on the pretest than in the post-test, meaning that the manipulation may have had something to do with this change, and they were more afraid in the pretest. With that being said, there was very minimal support for my hypotheses, but it did add more literature to terror management theory, which is useful in studying anxiety, self-esteem, and depression in individuals who are near death, have suicidal thoughts, or witness the death of a loved one. This is just a simple bar graph displaying the means for the significant question in the happy condition. You can see the pretest was higher than in the post-test, meaning they were more afraid in the pretest. Some limitations of my study included small sample size, participants not knowing the word mortality, because in the funeral home condition I noticed that a lot of them did not check the word mortality. Since the pretest and the post-test had the same questions, a limitation is that they just circled the same answers out of ease. Participants may have tried to present themselves favorably, and there may have been other third variables that were influencing their self-esteem and anxiety levels at the time of the study. Future research should continue to investigate how an environment causing thoughts of death impacts self-esteem and anxiety. Researchers should also create new questionnaires that test the same concepts but have different questions in the pretest versus the post-test. And finally, I think it would be a good idea to manipulate self-esteem in that first neutral environment to see how it affects anxiety in the next manipulated environment. Here are my references, and that is my research study. Thank you for listening.